Ordinary Planning Committee at Derbyshire Dales District Council. There's a little bit of housekeeping first. If any of the speakers don't want to be recorded, please let the committee clerk, Tom, know, and he won't record you. If the fire alarm goes off, it's for real. So I'd like you to leave out the double doors, go down the stairs, out of the main door, and congregate on the top car park. Anyway, so moving swiftly on. Item 1, apologies. Angela.
Thank you. Apologies from Councillor Robert Archer, Councillor Graham Elliott, and substitute for Councillor Elliott is Councillor Wakeman.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're going to have one of those nights. Item 2, approval of minutes of the previous meeting. I move. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. Item 3, interest. Anybody declaring interest in tonight's business? Councillor Fitzherbert.
Sorry, the item on Bradburn, I'll declare an interest as one of the applicants is one of my tenants.
Okay, thank you very much. So, anyway, moving swiftly on, applications for determination. We'll go straight on to item 5.1, which is application number 22/00731, solicited building consent at Bradley Hall, Bradley. There is a little bit of late correspondence on it, so I'll let you read that first before we move on to the speakers. Okay, is everybody happy? Yes? In which case, then we'll move on to the speakers. The first speaker is Miss Sarah Whitehead, local resident, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when it's 30 seconds left. We just have to turn the microphone on. So.
Okay. Firstly, I would make it clear to anybody that is here tonight that I don't have any objection to anyone applying for planning permission to improve their home and quality of life. However, what I do object to is a developer with a history of similar commercial projects coming to a quiet village like Bradley, threatening legal action in a public village WhatsApp group and intimidating residents when people disagree with his planning application. Secondly, I'm extremely disappointed with Derbyshire Dales District Council, specifically the Planning Committee, for recommending this project for approval, despite the fact that there has been very strong opposition in the village. From my point of view, it's evident that none of the residents' valid and credible comments and concerns have been taken into consideration. Let me be very clear. The majority of the villagers and I, myself, do not want our village being destroyed by some significant commercial activity. It's interesting to note that other planning applications in the vicinity have been flatly refused by the very same planning committee. One could argue that these applications required less consideration. Thirdly, I'm alarmed to see that Ms McKenna's inflammatory comments on the village WhatsApp group have come to fruition. To refresh your memory, Ms McKenna stated it's all about the contacts, which I can only assume means one thing. The council is actively taking a lenient view of their planning application. Maybe for transparency, there needs to be a freedom of information investigation into this application. I feel that this would reassure the villagers that this application has been dealt with fairly and lawfully, and that Miss McKenna's boastful statement was perhaps written in a moment of flippancy. Fourthly, we have had zero response from the enforcement officer despite paying a private planning consultant to look into works that Mr Staley has already commenced. We've had no response from the enforcement team since last March. Why is that? Lastly, despite all the letters of objection, and should our objections be in vain and the planning application for Bradley Hall be recommended, even though the alterations are set to damage the fabric of one of the oldest barn conversions in history, then I would urge the committee to place a restrictive caveat or something similar to the application which prohibits Mr Staley, Miss McKenna and any future owners from using this property as a commercial entity. If, as Mr Staley states, and has vehemently stated, that Bradley Hall is his forever family home,
30 seconds left.
I would imagine he would have no hesitation in agreeing to this condition or caveat. I think then myself and the village would be more accepting of this proposed application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next on my list is Mr Barry Thomas, local resident, to speak against the application. Similarly, you have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left. Can you turn your microphone on, please?
In your summary document for the planning meeting, you list the consultation responses to the application. Almost all of these have been ignored. The committee has chosen to take a very narrow remit in considering the application. I quote, "The only issues to consider as part of this application for listed building consent would be the impact of the proposed works on the character, appearance and significance of the Grade 2 listed Bradley Hall. Of the 14 categories of local objections listed in the committee's document, many have previously been used as reasons to reject recent planning applications in the village. Only in this application have all of those reasons been put to one side. Previous statements have clearly indicated the applicant's intention to turn the hall into a commercial venue, and this application is a useful step towards increasing the saleable floor space. Ms McKenna's boast of having the right contacts in relation to planning applications seem to have borne fruit, given the committee's sidelining of local objections. This raises a question. What influence has been brought to bear on the planning officers or members of this committee such that so many local objections and planning guidelines can be ignored? The planning department's current enthusiasm for this application can only lead to the increased concern that the major factor in any case is the extent of the applicant's contacts. I urge you to reconsider and reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kerry, I wondered if you would like to give some sort of response to the last speaker on the insinuations within it.
Yeah, just to interrupt proceedings at this point, both speakers have made some allegations of potential corruption there, saying about contacts. And yeah, that's not something that this council does condone. So I would actually welcome, and I'll give my email address out if you can forward those to me, because we do take things like that very, very seriously, and we will look into that. Thanks.
Okay, Joe. Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Need to address a number of comments that have been made by the previous speaker. I think we just need to be clear in terms of what our considerations are in respect of this application, which is an application for works to a listed building. Our assessment is limited in that respect to the statutory duty, which is for us to consider or have regard to the desirability of preserving the building or its setting and any features of special architectural or historic interest which it possesses. So our consideration of this application are limited to the impacts on historic fabric and the significance of the building. We've assessed that in some detail in the officer's report and put a recommendation to committee. That's all it is, a recommendation. Ultimately, it's for members to decide whether they are happy with that recommendation and are happy for listed building consent to be granted in this particular case. So it's not a fait accompli as being suggested. It's a matter for assessment as part of this meeting.
Okay. Joe, do you want to make any comments at all? No? In which case, I'll open up to questions. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, I noticed new roof lights in a listed building. I'm concerned about that. Will character appearance be taken away?
Yes, that's part of the application. So the application involves conversion of the attic space and the addition of roof lights, which forms part of the assessment. So that has been considered. The council's conservation and design officers considered the alterations and deemed them to be acceptable in this particular context.
So we're happy with the conservation officer.
Yes, as set out in the officer's report.
Okay, Councillor O'Brien.
Yeah, just a brief question. Are you able to confirm that other listed building applications in the locality for roof lights have been refused on the basis that they would adversely affect the character of the building?
Yes, I think it's important to address that question because it's something that features in the representations received for this particular application. I am aware of applications to refuse works to listed buildings in the vicinity of the hall, but we assess every application on its merits. The significance of all the buildings will be different to the significance of a hall, which obviously is a much larger building. We've got roof lights concentrated on a particular elevation. You may have that roof plane or elevation interrupted by other features on the roof. And that level of assessment has been carried out as part of this application. We consider the impacts on this particular heritage asset to be acceptable. Different significance and different consideration to other listed buildings in the vicinity of the site.
Okay, Councillor Purdy.
Thanks, Chair. I think I know what the answer is, but I need to ask Chris, is there any consideration for conditioning commercial use?
Yeah, this has cropped up in consideration of other applications for development and works to this particular building. The lawful use of the building is as a private residence. If it's used for commercial purposes, I mean, it could be used as a holiday let, but the use of the premises at any scale, for example, as a party house where you had a concentration of people visiting the site, resulting in significant traffic movements to and from the site, would result in a material change of use of the premises, and we would have control over that. So it becomes a breach of planning control at that stage, rather than something that we should be controlling as part of this application for listed building consent.
Councillor Mrs. Burford.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, could you just go through what previous applications we've had for this, for Bradley Hall, what they were briefly, and whether they were approved or refused? That's just for clarification for tonight.
Yeah, apologies. Hopefully that's resolved the issue. What we've done is we've set out in the officer's report a relevant planning history, and that history is relevant to the current owner. So in terms of recent applications, we've had application code reference 21/01345/FUL. That was for erection of rear extension, accommodating swimming pool and conversion of orangery shed into kitchen, and incorporation into main dwelling and retention of timber panelled gates, hot tub canopy and hot tub. That was a committee decision. So the reference to it's not what you know, it's who you know, would imply that everyone involved in this meeting was somehow part of that decision, because it was a collective committee decision that was made in respect of that application, not an individual officer. The same applies to application 21/01346/LBALT, which was a corresponding listed building consent for that development. They're the most recent applications relating to this site associated with the current ownership.
Okay, Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Chair. Reading the Conservation Officer's report, are you comfortable that we have got sufficient plans in front of you now to approve this application? Because quite a few of his comments relate to more detail required. I just wondered if that was acceptable now, if you've had more detail.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lees. You'll note that this application has been with us for some time, and all of the information that's been requested by the Conservation Officer has been provided to officers and has formed part of the assessment of this application. There were concerns initially about loss of historic roof timbers. All of those are to be retained as part of conversion of the attic space, and we're happy with the impact of development on a historic fabric, having regard to our statutory duties in this case.
Okay, the last on my list for questions is Councillor Buttle, and then we'll move into debate.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think I might know the answer to this one already, but can you just have one side of a building listed and the other side doesn't count? Because at the moment it looks to me like they're just treating the back of this building like any old building.
In this particular case, the entire building is a listed building. In this particular case, the entire hall, it forms part of the listed building.
And you can't actually just list a facade. Can a facade be listed, or is it always the case that the entire building is listed?
I'll try and answer that as succinctly as I can. You can have a situation where there's a principal listed building or feature on a particular site. Like sometimes you can just have gates and walls that might form part of a listed structure. Then there could be curtilage listed buildings within the grounds or setting of that listed feature or building.
And of course, I've got the follow-up is, will that have been considered at the time when this building was listed? Will they have decided that just the front matters, or would they have just said, well, we just do the whole building unless somebody, you know, like, was the when they made the choice to list this building, would they have looked at the back of it and decided that that mattered?
In 1952, the entire building was listed, so an inspector at that time would have looked at the quality of the building, its significance, and deemed it was worthy of listing in its entirety at that time.
So are we, because if we, I'm trying to get this down to the 14 roof lights, because I can't think of any building of that age that I know of which has got a great row of velexes in it. Do we, I'll leave the question. I think I know where I'm going. Thanks.
Okay, so we've moved into debate. Councillor Allison.
So I'm going to ask it now. If there was some sort of outstanding enforcement action, can you just explain to me what that is? Thank you.
Yeah, that's something I'll seek clarification on after the meeting. I am aware of an unauthorised access that was formed within the vicinity of the hall. However, I'm not aware of any specific enforcement complaints relating to the building itself.
Councillor Rose.
I'm sorry, this is really a question. I'm surprised that the applicant isn't speaking tonight. Because I don't know Bradley Hall well myself, but obviously I know Bradley quite well. And when the property was on the market, I understood that there were 2 apartments with it. And I can see the concerns from the village that that it shouldn't be a party house. So if you could just say, Chris, you might not know whether these 2 apartments were for outside letting instead of being occupied by the family.
Yeah, my understanding from considering previous applications at this site is that there are 3 residential units on site. So you may recall the hot tub application and the holiday lets that those hot tubs would serve. So there's 3 residential units. The main hall itself is just 1 dwelling unit as the private residence of the applicant in this particular case.
Okay. Councillor O'Brien.
I take it we're in debate now, Chair. While I speak, could we have the existing elevation on the screen, please? I'm going to be moving that the application is refused, and I go through the reasons why. And owning a listed building can be a very frustrating experience. But it also comes with obligations. People who own listed buildings have obligations to the community and to the building. And as Chris has said, this is a listed building consent application, not a planning application. And I think it's always a little bit confusing to members of the public as to the difference between the two. And Chris is quite right that there are aspects that those people who are concerned about the application have made, which we cannot consider because we are looking at the effect of the proposal on the appearance and integrity of the building itself. So I'd ask those people who have made representations to understand that. It's not that we're not concerned, it's just it's a listed building application, and there are criteria associated with that. Now, I've looked at the concerns of people who have made representations around the listed building applications in the locality which have been refused, and I think the points they made are justified. I've also looked at the description of Bradley Hall, the listed building description, the English Heritage description. Now, this is important because what's in the description helps us decide which characteristics are important to protect when we have proposals to alter a building. And if you read the description, you see that plain tiled roof features prominently in that description. If you could put the existing elevation up there, please.
We don't have an existing elevation, but essentially it would be the same but without the roof lights on the top drawing.
No, it's a pity you don't, because if you see the image of the existing elevation, you will see very clearly that the elevations have, as the listing description says, a plain tiled roof. So if you look at that's it there. If you put the proposed elevation back, you will see that the insertion of the 14 roof lights, to me, is a very, very, very material amendment and alteration to that building. It significantly affects the appearance of an 18th century hall. And therefore, on that basis, given that we have an obligation to respect and protect the heritage of our listed buildings, I think that the scale of those alterations are more than one step too far, and that's the basis that I think the application should be refused. Nothing to do with the fact that the proposal is to use the attic space, but on the basis that the insertion of the roof lights is totally inappropriate to our obligation to preserve the character of a listed building. Now, one of the reasons you can use for major alterations to a listed building is that it's required to sustain the future of the building, to keep it in reasonable use. So we can ask ourselves, is that required in this instance? Well, we have a proposal for a master bedroom, a games room, and an office. And I have to say that, to me, that is no reason whatsoever to justify the insertion of 14 roof lights. It's not those alterations are not required to sustain the fabric of the building, and therefore I think they can be discounted. I think you can also look to see, if you look at the elevations there, you could see that it is possible to incorporate at least one master bedroom using the existing openings on the structure there. So it is possible for some of the attic space to be used for a master bedroom, not all of it, but some of it, without the insertion of those roof lights. So on that basis, I'm moving that we refuse the application, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Purdy.
Chair, I must confess I am in agreement with Councillor O'Brien. My reading of this literature, when I first saw 14 roof lights, I couldn't believe, quite frankly. And I've been to this site before, and I entirely agree with where Councillor O'Brien's coming from. I'm surprised that our officers not challenged this. One roof light might have been agreeable, but 14 is 13 too many. So I agree with Councillor O'Brien, Chair, and I would have to say that we need to refuse this and ask the applicant to come back to the drawing board with our officers. But I also want to say something, please, Chair, about what's been said by some of the speakers, and that really challenges the integrity of this planning committee and our officers. And I think without evidence, I think it casts a spur on this committee and our officers, which is wholly wrong.
Okay, thank you very much. Are you wanting to second the? Okay, Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I was going to second it as well because I just, like Councillor Purdy says, I don't support roof lights on a listed building like Bradley Hall. I think they totally out of place. So I'll be voting against voting with the Councillor O'Brien.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Fitzherbert.
Thank you. Well, as someone who's familiar with listed buildings, I have read the officer's report, and of course I'm led to the comments made by our design and conservation officer in 5.3, and I'm all for making either listed buildings or redundant buildings useful and usable for the future in order to sustain them, as Councillor O'Brien says. Although I accept his very reasoned argument, of course, I would draw your attention to on page 23 that in item little 4, the design and conservation officer does say it's considered that the 2 roof lights to the small pitched roof chimney stack should be omitted as the roof area is too small to accommodate roof lights. And so it has sort of been addressed by our officers, and it is a question of the quantum of what we're discussing. And if we're discussing 14, 2 have been knocked off here, although I don't seem to think it's part of one of the conditions, Chris. I haven't quite got that. But I would say we do have to look at this application, and it hasn't been determined. It was meant to be determined by August. I know we've had various issues surrounding Bradley Hall in the last few months, but our officers have done an awful lot of thought, certainly in this regard. And I just want to put that on the table. Thank you.
Okay, the last on my list before we go to the next, Councillor Burford.
Thank you, Chair. I too am inclined to vote for refusal of this application. I think what sort of I'm thinking about is that it seems to be that when applications have come in for roof lights in previous cases, I presume there weren't 14 in one building, so it seems a bit bizarre to suddenly say or recommend that we're prepared to accept 14 roof lights. I think that's the crux of it. I think 14 is not acceptable, and I agree with Councillor O'Brien when he said that people who live in and own listed buildings do have responsibilities, and we have to make these decisions as to whether what they are doing or propose to do affects the building itself, and in this case I think it does. So for that reason I will be voting for refusal.
Okay, as I said, that was the last on my list, so it's been moved. Well, are you wanting to make comment? Be very brief then, Peter, because you need to turn your microphone on so people can hear you, Peter.
Sorry, you distracted me with not. I think this is a step too far. I think 14 roof lights is on the list of building. The character and appearance is completely taken away. You could see that roof light from a distance. It would be shocking to have roof lights on a listed building like this. So I agree with the other speakers. Right. Okay.
Thank you very much. So it's been moved and seconded for refusal against officer's recommendation. All those in favour, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? So it's been refused. Thank you very much. Right, moving on. Item 5.2, which is land east of Wheatley Road, Two Dales. There is a little bit of late correspondence, so if you'd like to read that before we move on to the speakers. Okay, I think you should have read it by now because it's in about 5 lines. So the first on my list is Miss Catherine Sterling, local resident. To speak against the application, you have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you. My name's Catherine Sterling. I and my family have lived in Two Dales for over 40 years. I'm not used to speaking in public, so forgive me if I'm coming across as being a little nervous, but my objections are heartfelt. Wheatley Road is in fact a quiet, narrow, rural lane on the edge of the village, below an ancient wooded hillside, and within a landscape that deserves protection for future generations to enjoy. The lane is so narrow that 2 cars cannot pass, refuse lorry cannot run the full length, and when I walk with my grandchildren, we must stand with our backs against the wall for a car to pass safely. The landscape, of which the field is part, makes up the intrinsic character of Two Dales. It was cared for by past generations, and we should take extraordinary care before we allow it to disappear under bricks and mortar. Once built on, it can never be restored. I question the need for 3 dwellings built on a green field outside of the settlement boundary. If this was granted, would it not set a precedent for further development, if not on the same site, others in green areas? We need social housing, we need starter homes, but the proposed dwellings will probably be high-value properties in an area of historic beauty that deserves our protection. I take heart that a similar application was refused in 2017. An historic landscape cannot have a price. We have a duty to care for it, and I hope that you would consider my points when you make your decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The next on my list is Mr. Mark Young, local resident. To speak against the application, you have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Mark Young, local resident, speaking, as you said, against the proposal. I think we've got to understand that this is only an outline proposal at the moment. And what we know is that, as has already been said by the previous speaker, that this is a very important piece of land. Because it's an outline permission only that they're after, there is no telling that at the end of the day, the very high specifications that they're talking about, the ecological improvements that they're talking about, the solar panels and all of that, will happen. There is no telling that the number of dwellings will be stuck at 3. So I think that what we have to have a concern about is the future. There are over 200 new houses, new dwellings already within a mile of this field. And a local referendum held only a number of years ago, 3 years ago I think it was, overwhelmingly residents voted in favour of the maintenance of the boundaries of the village as currently is. I know because we live on land abutting into Wheatley Road, that the ability of building wagons, trucks, to actually get up and down that, as you noticed yesterday, those of you that visited when you had the problem with your own minibus getting up and down the lane, it just couldn't work. When the county council gave approval for the resurfacing of the road, our wall was damaged quite badly, and that was with a small truck going up and down. So I don't see how you can protect the curtilage of the walls without turning down this application. We know also that the
30 seconds
applicant,
left.
we know also that the applicant is talking about using the gates that's there. That gate was built without planning permission, and you actually had to give it planning permission for it to be built retrospectively for agricultural use only. One final point, Chair. There are a lot of visitors to that field, including badgers, fox, deer, hedgehogs, barn owls, pheasants, tawny owls, many small birds, large birds.
Sorry, your time's up.
So we
Thank you.
speak for those. Thank you.
The last on my list is Councillor Jason Farmer, Darlingdale Town Council, to comment on the application. You have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
Darlingdale Town Council objects to this development for the following reasons. This site is accessed from an extremely narrow road, and as members found at the site visits on Monday, the committee's bus driver had to find an alternative parking area as the road is so narrow and dangerous. As previously mentioned, this site was refused permission in 2017. The 3 properties that are proposed will alter the character of the side of Wheatley Road and will remove the natural beauty of the open fields that the local residents enjoy. This development will be on land that is in the curtilage of a Grade 2 listed building. Developing this land would detract from the aesthetic qualities of this building and not be in keeping with the area. Darlingdale Town Council would ask for the planning officer's recommendation for refusal of this development to be upheld, as we consider it not suitable for this location. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Joe.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. This is a site that members will have visited yesterday to appreciate in its context. There's quite a clear distinction between the character of Two Dales on the western side of Wheatley Road, being quite densely developed with residential properties, and the eastern side, where the application site sits, is more sort of sporadic properties and an open countryside. Hence why, presumably, the settlement boundary of Darlingdale was drawn along Wheatley Road. So that forms the basis of the first reason for refusal for the local planning authority. There are also concerns regarding the setting of the Grade 2 listed, I believe it's called the Cottage, on the opposite side of Wheatley Road. I noticed a number of comments made about the safety of the access and the existing scenario along Wheatley Road, but the local highway authority haven't raised any concerns in that regard. So it's that's the reason it's not formed the basis for the third reason for refusal, effectively. I think the speakers did a pretty good job at setting out the application, so happy to take questions.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Just some further information. While the Highways Authority didn't object to this, didn't they ask for splays to be inserted into the road?
They did, and that's something that members will need to consider, because the requisite visibility displays may have an impact on boundary vegetation. At 2.4 metres back from the carriageway edge, there needs to be unobstructed visibility displays for a particular distance. So you've got to think you've got a boundary wall there that's a metre in height, so anything above that height in advance of that visibility display would potentially need to come out to ensure that appropriate displays can serve this development, and that itself could have an impact on the rural character of this part of Wheatley Road.
Okay, Councillor Burford.
Thank you, Chair. Just for a bit of clarification, I'm very confused about the what Derbyshire County Council Highways are saying. I'm surprised at what they're saying, but they seem to be saying that a refuge vehicle wouldn't be able to enter the site, so the bin location would be provided within the site so that bins can be stored clear of the public highway on collection day. What do they mean by that? I don't understand what they mean by that. How would these bins be collected? Are they saying that they'd be on the roadside? on this very narrow road. I'm not really clear what they mean by that.
I think what they're suggesting is that because a bin lorry couldn't access the site, that there'd be a need for a storage area for bins. So that would have to be built into the permission. So if we were minded to approve planning permission, we'd have to consider, well, where will bins be stored, and make sure there's appropriate provision for that as part of any planning permission.
Okay.
I realise it's not a sort of crucial part of this application, but it did strike me as being a bit strange.
Okay, nobody else down for questions, so I'll move into debate. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. I was frankly astonished at the IOA's comments, but there we go. It was refused in 2017, and it's right that the officers refused it now. The speakers have spoken eloquently to protect that parcel of land, and it should be in perpetuity. So I'm happy to go with officers' recommendations for refusal, Chair.
Councillor Froggatt.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to second that. I agree with everything that the speakers have said and that other members have said. So yeah, I will go with officer recommendation.
Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, I'll support the previous speakers. Thank you.
Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. I will just elaborate a little bit on what's been said, if that's okay. I think the planners have got it absolutely spot on in this. I wasn't able to go on the site visit yesterday, but I'm very, very familiar with this site. Indeed, very familiar with the proposal that was on Park Lane, which was turned down on appeal by the planning inspector. I think probably for exactly the same reasons that we're saying here, which is encroaching into the countryside, causing harm to the character of this side of Wheatley Road, as Joe Baldwin said. And I think the thing about well, I think it was brought up somewhere about satisfying housing need. This application for 3 high-end properties will do so little that it's insignificant to the housing supply difficulties, shall we say, that we've got. They're going to be high-end properties. They're not going to help with the housing need that we've got. Certainly in Two Dales and Darleydale, and in fact in the district as a whole, which is for affordable properties, whatever that means, and that people can actually afford, I suppose that means, or social housing. So for all those reasons, I think also, I think one of the speakers said this, but it would set a very dangerous precedent if we voted for this. So I hope we don't. I hope we go along with officers.
Okay, the last on my list is Councillor Hughes, and then we'll go to the vote.
I think it's all been said. I won't say any more.
Short and sweet, that's what I like. So it's been moved and seconded with your recommendation for refusal. All those in favour, please show. Those against? And any abstention. So that's unanimous refusal. As you know, item 5.3 has been withdrawn. So we'll move straight on to item 5.4, which is conversion of stables to form one number holiday let and erection of attached agricultural buildings at the stables of the old mill house at Bradbourne. Now, there is no late representations on this. I have only one speaker on this. So we'll move straight to the speaker, which is Mr. Daniel Potter, local resident speaker against the application. You have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
So, good evening, everybody. First of all, I thought I had 5 minutes, so I apologise, and I will definitely get cut off at some point. But good evening. My name's David Potter. I live at Bradbourne Mill with my wife Sandy, and together with our daughter Sophie, who lives in Tissington, we manage a thriving holiday let business at a highly accessible location, which supports sustainable tourism. I think it's fair to say we're very passionate about Bradbourne Mill, demonstrated in many areas in the 2 years that Sandy spent researching the history of the mill, planting of numerous trees, hedgerows at the site, the time and effort taken to clear the old mill race, and setting up public open days for the mill to share the history with the local community. So in order to meet increasing demand for accommodation, we now wish to convert the existing stables to provide a multi-purpose holiday let. At the weekends, it will be used for extra accommodation, but during the week, we plan to use the space for the cleaners to wash, dry and iron all the laundry on site, which will also help to reduce our carbon footprint. So the reason I'm here today is that since September last year, we've been in dialogue with the Senior Planning Officer and Design and Conservation Officer. We thought everything was good and our statements and everything met with policies, but on the very last day of the approval, we were notified it would be sent to this committee for a decision. So I'd like to address the 2 points that have been raised to demonstrate how we feel we do successfully comply. So a sustainable location for tourism. Bradbourne Mill is already a sustainable location for tourism and is close to local services and facilities and benefits from bus services to both Tissington and Bradbourne. Some of our guests arrive by public transport, and through feedback and TripAdvisor reviews, it's clear that the majority of our guests would rather leave their cars at the cottages and walk to the local facilities in villages such as Tissington, Parwich, Kniveton, Carsington and Brassington. All of the benefit from our guests who arrive either on foot or by bicycle to their shops, cafes and pubs. With our 52 guests each weekend and sometimes more in the peak season, it truly makes a positive impact on these.
I'll just notify you've got 30 seconds left, but I'm going to allow you another 2 minutes because I've just noticed on my list it says you're speaking against it, and actually you are the applicant, so don't worry, carry on.
Okay.
You've got 2.5 minutes left.
Thank you. I think, yeah. And point number 2, the stable conversion makes a positive contribution. So the planning permission for the existing stables was granted back in 2007, and the decision to approve the stable was made in recognition of its design, character, appearance, and the positive contribution it makes to the Grade 2 historic surroundings. This surely illustrates that the stable has already met the planning policies to have been granted development and disputes the current concern. So the proposal of today seeks to simply reuse the building with no changes to its character and appearance except for a sympathetic extension to the rear. And this design was agreed with the planners. The design and location of the attached agricultural store was also agreed by the Conservation Officer and the Senior Planning Officer. Furthermore, I would like to reinforce that no objections have been made to this application from either the Parish Council, the Design and Conservation Office at Derbyshire Dales, the Environment Agency, County Highways Authority, and no objections from the Environmental Health Team. Plus, no objections were received from local residents, members of the public, or other interested groups. So in summary, the proposed development will create additional employment, have a beneficial impact on local businesses, and support local tourism, as well as reducing our carbon footprint by keeping our laundry in-house. We have invested heavily in the site over the 14 years we have lived there and have developed an award-winning business in a truly sustainable location. We believe our application satisfies all planning policy, and in addition to this, we've received no objections. Therefore, Sandy and I respectfully ask the members of this planning committee to give their support to this application. Thank you very much.
Very succinctly, we're just under 30 seconds left.
Whew.
Okay.
And breathe. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyway, are you taking this one, Chris? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. A number of points that get to the essence, really, of this application and its consideration. Sustainability of location. As an exception to normal planning restrictions in the countryside, we do allow for conversion of buildings that are of architectural or historic interest that contribute to landscape character and their environment. Back in early 2000s, as set out in the history section of this report, planning permission was granted to convert the existing mill buildings to dwelling houses on this particular site. And as part of conversion and subsequent development, we allowed a stable building within the grounds of those buildings for ancillary use. What members need to consider is whether they feel the stable building itself contributes to the environment to such an extent to warrant its conversion to a use that is otherwise unsustainable in countryside locations such as this. You will note from the officer's report that we have reflected on a fairly recent appeal decision for conversion of buildings, not in this area, but in a similar area which was remote from services and facilities in the nearest settlement. And the inspector concluded in that particular case that was unsustainable location to service the needs of tourism when tourists and visitors when those buildings were to be used. So 2 issues: sustainability of location, and if members accept that it's an unsustainable location, then as an exception, is the building worthy of conversion and reuse to the extent that it should override normal controls in relation to unsustainable developments in the countryside. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. It's the sustainability thing that gets to me. This is one additional property, the one additional vehicle coming to Bradbourne. That vehicle will go elsewhere in the district and the county, but it would go there from any other location which might be in a town close by. I don't really understand why this is different from why it's so important that it merits refusal. I don't think the building itself is of great merit, but if it's not used, then it will fall into disrepair, and then it will be an eyesore. So, can you explain to me how many more car miles will be entailed from this development as opposed to putting it somewhere in the nearest town?
Yes, it's a matter of judgment. I'll come on to sustainability of location in a moment. I think in terms of the existing building, the application involves a proposal to construct a new storage building on site, in addition to converting the stable, which is currently used for storage. So I think the building would remain in viable use in terms of providing the storage needs of the existing mill complex. In terms of sustainability of location, I think it's covered in the officer's report, but in section 7.16, the inspector, when looking at a similar proposal, considered that, whilst acknowledging there was a regular bus service that operated in that particular area, and some access via foot and cycle to some very basic services and facilities, it was acknowledged that the vast majority of the basic needs of visitors to the site would only be serviced by the private motor vehicle. And that's a consideration because you want to locate new development, in particular in locations where you can readily access it via a variety of different methods: sustainable travel by bus, train perhaps, and have cycling and walking opportunities when you arrive, so that you're not reliant on a private car. So I think it's a matter of judgment. Members may consider, well, there is a bus service that operates in this area. It isn't that far away from some services and facilities. You may conclude that it is a sustainable location, but that's within your gift. But officer's assessment is we don't feel it is a sustainable location for the reasons stated.
Okay, Chair. Well, one follow-up question. To improve sustainability, could we condition that a couple of electric EV charging points be put in place so that it would serve this building and the other buildings as well? And people are going to need those. 15% of the cars on the road, new cars on the road this year are going to be EVs, so it seems to be a sensible thing to do and not very expensive.
Yeah, the applicant sort of covered a lot of that in their their supporting information to officers. So it would make sense if members were minded to approve the application that measures to encourage, sustainable travel to the site, and also when it's being occupied by holidaymakers, and for those measures to be implemented. And we need to think, if members are minded to approve the application, think about other controls, including conditions to restrict occupancy, so it's used as holiday let, etc.
Yeah, given what you've just said, if it was approved, I think looking at the applicants, I think you'll find that would be be put on it, be reasonable. I'm sure we can add as a footnote anyway on the decision notice if it were passed. Anyway, the next on my list is Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. It all centres on the stable, really. Looking at the stable, it was built in 2007. It's comparatively a modern building, really, in historical terms. Looking at it, the stables, it's got doors, it's got windows already in it. Its conversion wouldn't really be a shock to the system of a listed building. So I disagree with you on this. I think it could be converted into holiday let, because it wouldn't be materially altered whatsoever, and it wouldn't, character traits wouldn't reflect on the listed building.
Is there a question in that, Peter?
Yeah,
somewhere?
that's a question.
Oh, okay.
I disagree with it. Yeah.
Okay, I respect your opinion.
But my question also, I agree with Councillor Hughes that we should be a matter of course, we should put electric points in now, because they were, well, it's not a subject, but that's my question. Would you agree with me, Chris?
Well, as officers, we're recommending refusal, so I wouldn't agree with you. But I think if you're minded to approve the application, that would be a sensible way forward. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got 4 more on my list for questions. Then we're going into debate. Councillor Rose.
My question is, if we allow the conversion of this rather dilapidated barn, the applicants are asking for a store, well, a separate store, but obviously part of this application. So could it not be sort of have a tie on it, so that, say, in 5 years' time, the applicants couldn't come back and reapply for another holiday let?
Yeah, I think if members were minded to approve the application, we just need to reflect on what it is that's being applied for. So the storage building is a general storage building for use by the existing accommodation on site. I think if there were concerns that it could be incorporated into habitable accommodation associated with the holiday let, I don't think that's the applicant's intention, but I think you can make it clear through restricting the use of the storage building to that particular purpose. And the reason for that would be to prevent an otherwise unsustainable form of development, allow us to exercise control going forward.
We're not in debate yet, we're still in questions. Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair. I just want some clarification and probably a definition as well of, and this is surrounding it being not a sustainable location for a holiday let. So in paragraph 7.33, you've quoted, and I see this a lot on these types of applications, that it's too far from basic services and facilities. Can you give me a definition of what those are and how far away do they have to be for it not to be sustainable? Thank you.
It's a difficult question to answer with sufficient clarity, but I think if you are a holidaymaker, you needed some bread, for example, or some milk. Where would you obtain that from without having to travel to the nearest settlement or shop to access those provisions? It's as basic as that in this location, you are reliant really on the private motor vehicle to access the most basic of provisions. It's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but it's that level of consideration.
Okay, can I just come back on that? Because I do go away and I go to holiday lets. One thing that I do is that I'd probably do an online food order to be delivered to the location that I'm staying in. And I think a lot of people do that now. So actually, I don't want, when I'm on holiday, I don't actually want to spend my time going food shopping, to be honest. Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien, and then I've got Councillor Buttle, and then we go to debate.
Yeah, two questions, Chris. If this application were to be approved, do you think it would set a precedent for future applications of a similar nature in respect of the sustainability of the location? And secondly, are you, just to confirm, I think what Councillor Hughes was saying, would you be happy to include, if it were approved, effectively a sustainable transport plan to any approval?
I'd certainly recommend a sustainable travel plan to form part of any planning permission should members be minded to approve the application. I think in terms of setting a precedent, I think if members are satisfied that this is a sustainable location for tourism related development, then in effect you're saying that future growth and development of the site may in principle be acceptable. There are other constraints on the site in that we've got 3 listed buildings and we have to think about the setting of those listed buildings, so that provides some degree of protection. Members are entitled to come to that conclusion. They may feel that the building as well is worthy of conversion and reuse in terms of its impact on its environment. If you feel it has makes a positive contribution, then that would carry weight also. So
that wasn't quite my question, Chris. I mean, I agree it's an unsustainable location. My question was, in approving it, with that in mind, would that set a precedent which would give you difficulty in judging future applications?
Well, officers' view would be the same in terms of sustainability of location. However, members could, at some point in the future, if they wanted to, come to a different conclusion on that.
Okay, the last on my list before debate is Councillor Buttle.
Thank you, Jason. When it was first built in 2007, what do you think drove the choice to make it look like a stable?
I think it was a stable.
There was actually a stable there first. So there was actually a stable there first.
It was approved as a stable, yeah.
But do we know, like, there's no, like, horsiness around there, is there? It's just like a stable.
Yeah, stable. I think it's fair to say at the moment it's just used for general storage use. I think that was evident from the visit yesterday.
Okay, so now we've got this stable building which is going to be promoted to holiday accommodation, and we've got another building on the side, put to one side, which is going to be some sort of general storage, possibly a laundry, possibly something else, I'm not entirely sure. What's to stop us having some sort of ribbon development from here to Wirksworth?
Well, we have to assess every application on its merits, and officers would equally have the same concerns about the sustainability of location. If ultimately it was a committee decision, then that would be ultimately your decision to make in terms of whether you felt that type of development would be appropriate.
So this building that's going on the side, there's nothing to stop another planning application going in later to say that can they have another 2-bedroom holiday accommodation on that they're extending this into while they're converting. I just don't see what it is that we're doing to stop it. You know, like, how are we stopping this from becoming a, you know, like something that's eventually, bit by bit, is going to nibble away the heritage asset that it's attached to.
Okay. Do you want to answer that, Chris?
Can I take that as a rhetorical question? I think you made a point there, and I accept that point.
Okay, so we're in debate. Councillor Rose.
Thank you. As ward member, I've visited Bradbourne Mill several times, as some of you did yesterday on the site visit. The development of Bradbourne Mill is absolutely stunning. I would congratulate the owners with what they've done. This is the sort of development, surely, that we should be encouraging. We are all against, as we've recently seen in Brassington, people buying cottages and then turning them into holiday lets. These were redundant buildings. They were very attractive buildings, but they have been enhanced. They are absolutely magnificent. And I do feel that we should all be supporting this. 47 holiday cottages in Brassington. We don't want any more. The bottom of my village is being congested by traffic and parking at the holiday cottages. You know, we must support people like this and complexes like this. So therefore, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to say that will you support me on this occasion?
Are you wanted to move it for approval against officers' recommendation?
I think we should all vote for the approval of the conversion.
So I'll take it that you've moved it for approval.
Yes.
So that's find a seconder. Councillor Hughes. Okay. Councillor Hughes, and with the conditions as set out by Chris.
Chair, thank you. Yes, I would support Councillor Rose in this application and accepting the application, approving the application. I think our planning team need to think about the criteria used for sustainability, because it's been clear in this meeting and in previous meetings that there are no clear criteria for sustainability, and therefore the sustainability policy is defunct. It can't be used in determining planning applications. If there were decent criteria, then we could use it, but we can't, and therefore it doesn't apply. It can't apply in this case. They talk about, the planning officers talk about distance to basic facilities. They don't talk about distance to tourist spots. Bradbourne is in the middle of a beautiful part of the country with footpaths near the reservoir, Cosington Reservoir, near Brassington, and other beautiful villages with lots of good walking opportunities along lanes and footpaths are noticeable on the Ordnance Survey map. So, and that is the primary reason why people come to Derbyshire, to go on the footpaths, not to go and visit Tesco's or Sainsbury's. They can do that at home. So, as far as sustainability is concerned, the criteria has to include ability to reach tourist spots as well as town centres. If it is only to do it at town centres, then we're severely restricting where we have tourist accommodation to the middle of Ashbourne, Wirksworth, the Matlock corridor, and other locations like that. So I would support Councillor Rose in this, because it is at a tourist destination and therefore sustainable in terms of minimising distance to some tourist locations, and it is also it will also enable reuse of a building which may fall into disuse otherwise, or just be used for storage, and therefore it is a benefit to the local economy in terms of, and therefore benefits the amenity of the local area. Therefore, I think we need to approve this particular application. I would say that we need to, in addition to the conditions associated with the buildings concerned, which are described in the report and need to be turned into conditions, I would also say that we also should be looking at energy carbon reduction measures, such as EV charging points as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wakeman.
Yes, Chair, I support the application as well. Did we agree that an EV charger was going in?
I think the applicants just told you they have 3 already.
Oh, okay, I'm happy.
But I'm sure a footnote will be put on the decision notice. Okay, Councillor O'Brien.
I support Councillor Rose's recommendation, but I do have some reservations about easily overriding our approved policy. Therefore, I do think it's important that we have a condition requiring a sustainable travel plan, and it has to be an effective, sustainable travel plan, because we all sit in another place and vote unanimously that one of our strategic objectives as a council is to discourage the use of the private car. We can't have it both ways. We cannot on the one hand say that we're trying to encourage people or discourage people from using a car, on the other hand saying, yes, it's such a wonderful property that we'll put that to one side. It's such a wonderful conversion that we'll put that to one side and allow people to arrive in their four-wheeled motors. So I have some reservations, but as long as it's accompanied by what our officers feel confident is a deliverable, sustainable travel plan, then I'm happy to go along with the approval.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure if it does go for approval, that the STP will be put in as well. Councillor Burfoot, and then I'll go to the vote.
Yeah, I will be brief, Chair. I'm going to put a word in here for our officers because I think they are limited very much by our own policies. I've said many times in planning meetings about this idea of sustainability, and the two adults with two children with all suitcases hopping on a bus to get there. I mean, let's be realistic sometimes.
Okay, Councillor Purdy, and then we'll go to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. I'd hand up for a while. So, if you recall, members, last year I said that we need to review our sustainability plan. If you recall, it was Councillor Morley that supported an application in an open field. And as Councillor Allison says, people nowadays either order the food to be met at the door or they take it with them. So I do think we've got our knickers in the twist again over this. And I did ask last year that we review our sustainability policy. And I hope, Chris, you'll pursue that with Mike Gates. So we're in different times. And I entirely agree with Councillor Barefoot. We can't blast our officers because they're following policy. But I do also feel for the applicants because they had a green light until literally the last day and then a U-turn and smack what's going off. So I do feel for them there. So I'd like also to consider what the applicants said on site yesterday, Chris, and that is that they want to do the holiday let only at the weekend. So I do think probably that with the sustainable travel condition should be accompanied by a condition on a period where they can only conduct let. Is that feasible or is that agreeable?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because if we're accepting that the holiday let use is an acceptable use of that building, in terms of enforceability of a condition that only allowed it to be used as a holiday let for 3 or 4 days a week is going to be very difficult to police, and is probably not necessary. I think we have to trust the word of the applicant. We can put restrictions on the storage building. I think if we accept that the holiday let is an acceptable form of development, then I think we should accept that.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I entirely trust the applicants, and I thought you'd say that, but I need to ask the question because it was raised yesterday on site. And this company has won a great award. They're a great asset to our district. Thank you.
Anyway, members, it's been moved and seconded for approval against officers' recommendations, set out with all the conditions, the sustainable travel plan, and the restrictions to this attached agricultural building. So, members, up to you. All those in favour, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? So it's been approved. Okay, with the conditions. What I'm going to do now, members, is one of our members of staff needs to leave. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjourn for 15 minutes and come back at 7:30. So we're going to all have a little bit of a comfort break and then get back on with the business. Okay, so I'm going to adjourn the meeting for 15 minutes. Resume at 7:30. So moving swiftly on, item 5.5, which is application number 22/00910 full, single storey rear extension, 11 King Street, Ashbourne. So I don't think we've got any late reps on this. There's no speakers, so straight over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Chair. Members visited the site yesterday. This is an end terrace property located outside but just adjacent to the conservation area. The application originally proposed the erection of, or the creation of some parking spaces to the front and the erection of a dormer window to the rear elevation, but they've been omitted from the scheme. So the application is now only for a single-storey rear extension shown on the plans there, which will be constructed from brick to match the house and will provide a larger kitchen and living space for the occupants. The extension would be built from matching materials and will be subordinate in scale to the host property and will have very limited impact on the setting of the conservation area and the listed church to the rear and wouldn't harm the amenity of neighbouring properties. Therefore, the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions set out in the report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've read in the report, and I just want clarification on it. If this was slightly reduced in size, would it come under permitted development and they could go ahead and build it anyway? Thank you.
Yeah, I've not done the precise calculations, but yeah, if it was 36 centimetres shorter and 37 centimetres lower, it would be permitted development. Now they would have to go through a prior notification process, and if a neighbour objected, then we would have to take into account amenity, but we couldn't take into account its appearance.
So can I just come back on that? So if for whatever reason this was refused, how defendable would that refusal be if they went to the planning inspectorate? Thank you.
Well, if it was refused on design grounds, we have to take into account there is potentially a fallback position to the applicant for a slightly smaller extension, which would have a very similar appearance. So it depends on the reason why it was refused. If members thought this extension wasn't acceptable on amenity grounds rather than design grounds, I would feel fairly confident defending that. Design grounds slightly less so, but obviously we'd have to see what the inspector thought about that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was going to ask the same questions, well, one of them anyway. But I'm sorry I wasn't on the site, but is this extension going to be very similar to the ones that are already there in the other properties? I mean, will it look different?
It will be, the materials will be similar. I think the extensions on the other parts of the terrace are lean-tos, so they've got sloping roofs. So there is a difference in form, yeah, but the materials are similar.
Just come back. So, are you happy that that wouldn't look out of character with the other ones?
No, we're happy, given the location of it, and it's a fairly simple design with matching materials, that it would be subordinate and in keeping with the character of the property. We're happy with it as set out in the report.
Okay, no more questions. We'll move into debate. Be a bit quicker than that, Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Snack.
Could you, the Ashbourne neighbourhood plan is relevant to this, but I don't see any reference to it in the officer's report. Can you confirm that the proposal is in accordance with the relevant design policy of the neighbourhood plan?
Yeah, if you look at section 3.2, paragraph 3.2, there are referenced there in terms of what the relevant policies are. The neighbourhood plan requires, similar to our policies, that require good design which conserves the affected heritage assets. So with it complying with our policy, the view is that it would also comply with the neighbourhood plan policies as well.
Okay. Councillor Slack, and then I'll move into debate.
Oh, I thought we was debates.
Oh, you want to speak in debate, do you, Peter? Yeah. Okay. No, I hadn't got there yet. I thought we had questions. Councillor Lees.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, originally I called this into committee when it was having the other work done with the front wall, etc., and the dormer, but I'm quite happy now with the rear extension, so I'm happy to move officers' approval on this one. Thank you.
Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I support Councillor Lees in this. We know the area very well, and at the rear of this building there's adequate space and it doesn't encroach on neighbours, nothing really, so I'm happy to second it.
Councillor Slack.
Yeah, we was in debate, but anyway. Yeah, I think it's acceptable. I think the officers got this perfectly correct, and especially now there's no digging out at the front onto the road, because there's a lot of cars parked there and it would take away a lot of parking spaces. So, yeah, I fully agree with this and support it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Wakeman. No. Okay, there's nobody else down on my list. So it's been moved and seconded to grant permission with conditions. All those in favour, please show. All those against? And any abstentions? So that has been approved unanimously. Right, moving swiftly on. Item 5.6, which is 14 the Channel Ashbourne. It's erection of bungalow. So we have a bit of late correspondence, which I want you to read to first, then we'll go to the speakers. Everybody happy? Yep. Okay, we'll move on to the speakers. The first on my list is Mr. David Smith, local resident, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes and I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left. I'll strike him off my list then. So the only one last on my list for this is Mr. Alex Job, the agent, to speak for the application. You have 5 minutes and I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. For context, the applicant, Mr. Ecott, is a long-time resident of Ashbourne and lives in Whitehorse Barn next door to the application site. Mr. Ecott also owns number 4 The Channel. We welcome the officer's recommendation for this application. The application site is sustainably located in the centre of Ashbourne and is within walking distance of numerous shops and services. Given its location, we consider a car-free development as acceptable and we welcome the agreement of the Highway Authority on this. The scale of the building is proportionate to its plot size and will provide a secluded bungalow in the centre of town for future occupants. We note the objections received and we have responded to the case officer throughout the process to address these. We would also like to emphasise that the Ashbourne Neighbourhood Plan identifies a need for 1 and 2 bedroom bungalows, and this proposal contributes positively towards meeting that. We consider the application forms a sustainable pattern of development, and we support the officer's conditions and look forward to a positive decision. Thank you.
That was the shortest ever by an agent. Brilliant. So, anyway, Adam.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't quite ready. That was so fast.
No, neither was I.
Members visited this site as well yesterday, just after the last one. As been said, the site's in the centre of Ashbourne, in part of the rear garden of For the Channel, which forms part of a long Victorian terrace outside the conservation area. The application proposes to erect a single bedroom bungalow in part of the rear garden, which would have its own pedestrian access, sort of provided along an existing ginnel through. There will be no vehicle access. The proposed dwelling will be constructed from brick and tiles. The site is unusual in that it's what would normally be described as backland development without any vehicular access, but that isn't uncommon for properties along the channel, which are all only accessible on foot. The site is a sustainable one. It's in the centre of Ashbourne, close to facilities and shops, and policies support residential development here in principle. The dwelling wouldn't harm the character of the area, and the Highway Authority has no objection to the lack of vehicular access in this location because it is sustainable. Therefore, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions set out in the report. Happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Hughes. Sorry, he got his hand up before you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm just a bit concerned about the building works themselves. Living on a footpath myself, I know how difficult it is for builders to make use of the footpath for moving material around without blocking it. So are you satisfied that the builders will be able to move material on site and machinery on and off site without severely restricting use of the footpath for any other purpose?
Yes, I think it was definitely going to be an unusual build. But I've looked into the kind of equipment that's available just briefly before committee. I think the tightest point is about 1 metre, and you can get what are called micro diggers, which are specifically designed to go through doorways, let alone alleyways. And they're about just over 70 centimetres wide. So obviously, when they're coming down the alleyways, you're going to have banks people making sure that people aren't injured to stop them just as this thing comes through. Other than that, building materials are going to have to essentially be taken by hand or wheelbarrows, which is difficult and obviously labour intensive. But it's not a refuse planning permission in this case. Officers consider.
Right, Peter, go for it.
Well, you've answered my question. David's put it about the channel. I didn't go on site visit yesterday, and I wonder about the channel. And you've answered the question because you can get mechanical small diggers, what you walk it back, and barrows as well, mechanical. So, yeah, question's been answered, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Donnelly.
I think in answer to Councillor Hughes' question, the biggest item of equipment will be a wheelbarrow.
Any more questions, member? No? In which case I'll move into debate. Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah. You know the area very well myself, I'm sure you do, so it is unusual, but I admire the guy who's going to build it because there's a lot of hard graft in there. So I'm happy to make the offer.
Does that find a seconder? Councillor Wakeman. Anybody else wishing to speak in debate? Councillor Fitzherbert.
Thank you. Having visited the site yesterday, it was very useful actually to go in there as well. And I think it'll actually be a bit of a plus for Ashfield because it will be tidied up that side. It was a bit of a mess, and it's always good that we can tidy up a place as well. And I think it'll be fairly green as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The last on my list before we move to the vote is Councillor O'Brien.
Yeah, I think this is an imaginative development, and I wish it well. I apologise for not having scrutinised in detail the conditions. Given the location, is there an appropriate condition to ensure that the construction does not in any way adversely affect the amenities of the residents who are obviously very close by? That is restricting it to no construction taking place at weekends, public holidays, or early in the morning or late in the evening, which I think would be appropriate.
Yeah, if members thought that was necessary, in interest of amenity, we could impose a planning condition to set hours of construction, prevent construction on weekends.
I personally think that's an application of a development in this location that it is incumbent on us to make sure that during the construction we don't make nearby residents' life a misery with construction taking place on Sunday mornings, for example.
Councillor Donnelly, are you happy to have restrictions put on the operation of the site?
I think so. I mean, the thing is that the site will be developed by a self-employed builder who lives next door. He owns all the properties. So I think that, unlike big developments, I think that if you want to put a condition on, that's fine with me. I'm happy to support it.
Yep. You're happy with that, Mark?
I say that, Tom, because they will be using machinery, noisy machinery, whether it's one person or a company. You know, you'll be using something that makes a noise. Yes, but on site, you'll be making something. You'll be using something that makes a noise.
So if we can just add that to the conditions. Yeah. Okay. So there's nobody else down on my list. It's been moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour, please show. All those against, and any abstentions? So that's been done unanimously. Right. The next on my list is erection of one number dwelling at North Park Farm, Whitworth Road, Darleydale. There is a bit of late representation, I think, on this. So if you'd like to read that, and then we'll move on to the speakers. Has he sorted it for you, Sue? Good. Everybody happy? So the first person on my list is Mr. Jonathan Wood, local resident, to speak against the application. You have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
Good evening, councillors and officers. I'd welcome the opportunity to make a representation in opposition to the application, and I live in a neighbouring property, Mole End, Northwood Lane. I note the case officer's conclusion that the principle of the development is
I think you can move the microphone a little bit close. Some of them are having difficulty listening to you.
Sorry. I note the case officer's conclusion that the principle of the development is acceptable, subject to detailed conditions. So the key here is to ensure that the detailed conditions are both comprehensive and adhered to. So, are they comprehensive? Yes, as far as they go, but I'd like the committee to give consideration to 2 further conditions. One came up just now. Could we make sure that there's no building at the weekend, no construction at weekends? And the second one is a completion date. And by way of explanation, I note that the conditions demand that the development must be begun before the expiration of 3 years from the date of the permission, if granted. There's no similar requirement regarding the project finish date, and there is some substance to this concern. In 2021, the committee approved the retention of the horse exercise arena and the use of land as a dog exercise area for North Park Farm, and one of the conditions was that within 12 months of the date of this permission, the retaining walls and surfacing of the horse riding arena shall be undertaken in accordance with the submitted details. I'd like to see a similar and appropriate clause added as a condition, and the fear is that we have another perpetual building site. For example, that particular horse riding arena, it's now still sort of being developed 18 months after the granting of permission. So secondly, adherence. This is, of course, the responsibility of the applicant, but it must be actively monitored by the planning department with a rigour and frequency that is appropriate to the context of the site. And please can the planning committee provide such assurance to residents. And notwithstanding my earlier points, there are a lot of detailed conditions. I'd like to give credit to the case officer for her rigour in the definition of the conditions and the explanation for them, and I'd hope that the level of rigour continues to be applied in monitoring and control should the application be approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next on my list is Mr. Roger Yarwood, the agent, to speak in favour of the application. You have 5 minutes, Roger, but I don't think you'll need them. And if you could be quick as that young lad, that'd be brilliant.
I'm not going to try and challenge the previous agent in terms of undercutting the time. I'll just say this is a site which is within the settlement boundary. It's had a previous outline approval. The issue which has arisen is one of detailed design. Two refusals have been given on detailed design on appeal. The inspectors both supporting your officers. So this time round, we've engaged with your officers and made sure it's a design which is acceptable. And I'm happy to say that we've reached that happy outcome. And I hope now members will approve the application. Did that manage undercut the previous agent?
Bloody marvellous. Okay, so anyway, Adam, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've covered most of the points. One thing I would say in terms of conditions, one of the conditions that was mentioned was about construction hours or not at weekends. Yes, if members thought that was necessary, we could add a condition to control that. In terms of requiring completion of a development, that is normally contrary to government guidance. Sometimes you can have conditions where there's a certain issue on site or where a development is only acceptable if something else happens. But in terms of requiring a development to be completed to a set timescale, that's contrary to government guidance. The government is looking at possible changes to enforcement, and I think they're looking at the possibility of introducing a completion notice. But that would be something which we would undertake through our enforcement powers rather than through a planning condition, and it's not in law yet. So at this point in time, we couldn't put a planning condition on, and that would be held to be unreasonable. Happy to answer any questions.
Members, questions? Councillor Burfill and then Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. I think in the report, both Derbyshire Dales District Council and the County Council have mentioned about mature trees on site which should be retained. So is it possible to put, would it be possible to put TPOs on these trees? And also, an arboricultural impact assessment was required. I'm just wondering whether this has been done. I'm asking for these, I suppose, given the history of the site and the concerns of the parish council, which I won't go into, but they're clearly there.
I don't think Sarah concluded that the trees were going to be a constraint to the development, given the position of the dwelling in the centre of the site and the access. If that is something that members are concerned about, then we could require the submission of arboricultural impact assessment as part of the permission, and then as part of that we could implement tree protection measures if it was considered to be necessary. And in terms of TPOs, I think there are TPO trees already. Just looking at the comments on paragraphs 5.3 and 5.4. Yes, you'll see in 5.4, protect trees in the TPO. A tree protection zone of 6 metre radius from the northwest corner of the plot will be sufficient to protect tree roots. If you look at the plan, there isn't really any disturbance in that area shown on the drawings. But if members felt it was necessary, we could require that information, arboricultural impact assessment and method statement setting out root protection areas, and then that could be secured by planning conditions.
If I may come back under 5.3, it says there are mature trees on the site which should be retained and successfully incorporated into the proposed development. And then it goes on to talk about the ones that have got TPOs on. So they aren't the same trees, are they? So what I'm saying is, if there are some that are outside the development area that have got TPOs on, shouldn't we be thinking of putting TPOs on the ones that are on the site which are deemed to be or should be retained?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Burfill. I think if members are of the view that those trees are of high amenity value, we can, as officers, look at those trees and consider whether we'd want to protect them by way of imposing a tree preservation order on the trees that aren't currently protected. That's something we can look at, but it'd be separate to the assessment of this application. But if members wanted us to do that, that's something we can do.
If I may come back, I suppose what I'm thinking is that if there isn't any protection, they could go before any protection was put on them.
Technically speaking, that's correct. If members were concerned about the loss of those trees, obviously the agent's here and he's aware of the value that's been attributed to them by yourself and perhaps by other members. The trees are an important component of the landscape and will provide a nice setting for the development. So I'd be surprised if the applicant, given that they're not adversely affected by the development, would want to remove them. But if members were concerned, we can look at considering their worthiness of protection under tree preservation order legislation.
If I may come back, Chair, does that mean then that we could put in the conditions that those trees cannot be removed even if there isn't a TPO on them? Can we condition that they don't get cut down?
I don't think it's possible to condition that because the very most what we could ask for is a landscaping scheme which identifies all trees to be retained, protected, and all new planting on site. We could then give value to some of the landscape features that exist on site. We couldn't necessarily secure the retention of trees on the site. But if they were to be removed, then we'd have to consider, well, what is the impact of that and what compensation is required in order to discharge that condition.
Can I just add, having looked through the conditions again, condition 9 essentially does what Chris just described. So that that essentially is to show retained trees and then to protect them. So that would have the effect of making sure that the development itself doesn't harm any trees that aren't subject to a TPO. But that wouldn't prevent, for example, the trees being taken out in a few years' time. They wouldn't be protected. So that isn't something we could normally do by condition, as Chris said.
You'll have to get your TPO in soon. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Wood has quite correctly drawn our attention to the importance of the detail of the conditions, and I felt the same when I looked at condition 9. So my question is, why are we not asking that the landscaping or requiring that the landscaping scheme is implemented and completed prior to occupation? Why are we only asking that the scheme is submitted and approved? Why are we not asking that it's completed?
I agree. I think that could easily be remedied by, if you look under G, the development shall therefore be carried out in accordance with the approved details. Oh, actually, no, looking at it, if you look at G, that includes a timescale for implementation. So the way the condition is worded is part of those details would be the applicant telling us when various elements of the landscaping was going to be completed. So, for example, hard landscaping, walls, hard surfaces, would normally expect that to be carried out before the first occupation of the dwelling, whereas new planting normally require that to be carried out either before the first occupation of the dwelling or in the first planting season following the occupation of the dwelling. For example, if the development is completed in summer, it might be more appropriate to do the planting in the winter.
Well, that's what I thought. Why don't we say that here? Why are we
But
not saying
it is.
that?
If you look at G, that requirement of agreement of timescale, we will require those details as part of the scheme. So that it will be up to the applicant to tell us when it's going to be completed. If we're happy with it, then we'll approve it.
So are you saying that that the landscaping will have to be completed at the very latest, the first planting season after occupation?
Yeah, that's what I'd expect. Yeah, there's
Well,
not usually a good reason to go any longer than that. Yeah.
Okay. Nobody else down for questions, so I'll move into debate. Councillor Purdy.
Chair, move the officer's recommendation for approval.
Does that find a seconder? Councillor Slatt. Anybody else wishing to speak in debate? No. So it's been moved and seconded to grant with conditions as set out in the report. All those in favour, please shout. All those against? And any abstentions? So that has been approved. Thank you very much. And last but not least on our business tonight is Erection of cattle housing building and associated underground slurry store at Apple Tree Farm, Longford Lane, Longford, Ashbourne. Now, there is some late reps on this, so I'll let you read that first, and then we'll go to the speakers. Have you broken it, Sue? Are you pressing buttons too quickly? I beg your pardon. Is everybody happy? Yep. Right, in which case we'll move on. We've got 4 speakers on this. The first to speak is Mr. Edward Lovett, local resident, to speak against application. You have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
Good evening, councillors and officers. I'll start with the danger this application poses to users of the public highway. The site accesses onto a 60-mile-an-hour public highway, Longford Lane. The road is used by cyclists and forms part of a very popular Route 68 cycleway. There is also a school bus stop in proximity of the site access directly opposite Thurveston Lane. Line of sight visibility is restricted to the north due to hedges on both sides of the entrance in summer, and these become very overgrown. There is no provision for turning large vehicles that frequent the site, meaning vehicles must enter forward and reverse blindly onto the public highway. Access for large vehicles is only possible from the south. This forces vehicles to turn in Thurveston Lane if entering or exiting to the north. There is a video showing a tractor reversing blindly onto Longford Lane and then again down Thurveston Lane, a danger to motorists, cyclists, pedestrians and school children trying to get to school. Animals, feed and manure has to be transported via the public highway to and from the circa 12-acre site in Longford to where the business is centred 5 miles away in Hatton. Increasing the stock holding by 2.5 times is going to increase the traffic on the highway pro rata and makes no economic or environmental sense and will exaggerate the risks to users of the highway. It's alarming the Highways report missed this public safety risk. We brought this to their attention both via the planning portal and directly with the Highways Agency, to no response. Any attempt to create a provision for turning on site would further erode a diminishing small 12-acre plot. Moving on to noise pollution. There is an unusually high level of stock movement to and from the farm due to the nature of the business. Stock trading rather than farming in the traditional sense. And the distance between the barns and the proximity of the farm 5 miles away. This stock movement often takes place at night due to the applicant being employed elsewhere in the day. As a result, the neighbouring community are regularly exposed to 24 hours excessive animal noise while stock settle. The noise is abnormal for agriculture and disproportionate compared to other farms in the proximity. There are vets in the local community that will vouch for this. Increasing the stock holding by 2.5 times will increase this noise and disruption pro rata. In summary, the site is not big enough or suitably located to support a 250 head of cattle commercial enterprise. The issue with the access to the site, increased noise pollution and smell and disease in conjunction with the threat to contamination of the watercourse, which will be talked about by the other representatives, are a serious concern, and we request that the
Thank you very much,
application is
Mr. Lovett.
rejected. Done. Thank you.
Right, the next on my list is Miss Mary Hall, local resident to speak against the application. Similarly, you have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left.
Thank you and good evening. The comments we sent in initially concerned highways and environmental issues. Mr. Lovett and the Parish Council's clerk have already talked about much of that, or will be doing so, so I'm going to focus my comments on noise and smell. The initial application states in sections 1 and 5.1, the applicant has 100 cattle on the 13-acre site near us and wishes to bring an additional 150 cattle from his remaining 267 acres to this 13-acre field. Section PD9 of the Derbyshire Dales local plan states the District Council will protect people and goes on to say it will only permit development if the potential adverse effects are mitigated to an acceptable level. We don't believe this is going to be the case. We live in the country and of course we expect there'll be a certain amount of noise and smell, which can be disturbing, but we can't agree with the planning officer that a barn for a large number of additional cattle, along with the additional diesel engine and other vehicle noise and 2 fans, will result in an acceptable level. Likewise, whatever measures are put in place, with the additional quantity of slurry that will be produced, agitated, moved and spread, there will be a significant increase in smell. The prevailing wind blows in the direction of the nearest group of houses. The open side of the proposed barn faces many of the houses. According to the management plan, which actually only mentions 65 of the extra 150 cattle, slurry is spread during January, February, March, July and August. And in addition, when the stale air in the barn becomes harmful to the cattle, 2 fans can take it out, and that's likely to come our way too. Life in this nearby community of young families and retired people is going to suffer from it. Again, we don't believe the adverse effects can be mitigated to an acceptable level. We completely understand the applicant's wish to consolidate his business. We have no wish to fall out with a close neighbour, but this field is too small and too close to the local community for the development. And that's so we just have to object to it being scaled up in this location. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Mr. Michael Tunnicliffe, Clerk to Longford Parish Council. You have 3 minutes and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
Good evening. I'm clerk to Longford Parish Council. Longford Parish Council unanimously object to this planning application and indeed have many various concerns. There are highway and noise and odour management issues which you have heard about from local residents and which we fully support. Thirdly is the flooding issue. The site is low-lying and called the Marsh, and floods, of which we have images from 4 years ago, which I hope you have seen. Also of concern is runoff from the additional buildings hard standing, which will only exacerbate the situation. Any increase in water levels will threaten the functioning of the slurry store and could cause it to overflow, with the consequence of runoff entering the adjacent watercourse, and there is no provision in place to prevent this happening. Fourth, the applicant's core centre of land of around 270 acres is in Hatton, 5 miles away, not in Longford. Therefore, any new building should be prioritised there in compliance with the local plan policy EC10, Farm Enterprises and Diversification, which states, wherever possible, any proposed development makes full effective use of existing buildings in preference to the construction of new buildings and does not generate traffic that is unsuitable for rural roads. The applicant appears to be moving his business focus away from that area to a 14-acre field in Longford that floods, so we are concerned about his long-term plans for the site. Fifth, we have concerns that the manure management plan will not work. We have calculated that the slurry produced will be much greater than the capacity of the slurry store, and 14 acres of land is nowhere near enough to spread it on, and problematic, especially during the winter months when it is usually waterlogged. DEFRA's advice is that slurry cannot be spread on waterlogged or frozen ground, or if heavy rain is forecast, leaving no alternative but to transport it elsewhere on the narrow country lanes. Establishment of the business in Longford would only serve to increase movement of animals, feed and slurry on narrow country lanes, which is inefficient and environmentally damaging. Longford Parish Council
30
believes
seconds
we have
left.
proved there are serious concerns in 5 key areas: the local plan, flood risk, highways, mature management plan, pest and odour management. In conclusion, if any of the committee has not seen the visual evidence of a horrific highway manoeuvre necessitated by the restricted access to the site, then no decision should be made until they have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The last on my list is Mr. Edward Groves, the agent, to speak in favour of the application. You have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left.
The applicant, Mr. Daniel Hill, is thankful for the opportunity to put forward the case in support of the proposed development. The applicant comes from a long-standing farming family. He has purchased a 13-acre site as the base for his farm business enterprise. The applicant farms a total of 280 acres or thereabouts. This is spread across Hatton and various other locations, undertaking all management himself. The applicant's farm business is a mixed cattle and sheep enterprise comprising of 600 sheep and 250 head of cattle. The proposed building will be used to house suckler cows, calves and store cattle. The cattle are currently partly housed on site in the adjacent buildings and off site in rented buildings. In the interest of sustainability, animal health and welfare, the applicant seeks to house all cattle under his close supervision. DEFRA codes of best practice state that calving cows and young vulnerable calves are best to be kept within sight and sound of the farmer. This requires both sort of rigour and knowledge to look after these young animals, which require feeding twice daily. Calving cows are very vulnerable and require supervision 24/7 when calving. This is a very stressful time both for cow and calf. The building is adjacent to existing farm buildings, which will reflect their design and materials, which complies with policy PD1 of the Derbyshire Dales local plan. The proposed building is set back 20 foot behind the adjacent existing building in an effort to visually screen the proposed development from the roadside. The existing access will be used to serve the proposed building. It is worth noting that there has been no objection from the Highways Authority. The proposed building will reduce the agricultural traffic using the roads due to the applicant not having to travel twice daily to the rented site to feed, check and monitor livestock, often using a tractor and trailer. Vehicle circulation space will be improved on site. There has been a track approved in compliance with the temporary workers dwelling, which was approved in 2021, which I'm sure you'll have all seen on site when you came yesterday. The Environment Agency again had no objections. The applicant's slurry store has more than adequate storage capacity for the slurry. The slurry injection method will be used. As noted by the management plan, this will help reduce odour from the slurry. It is also worth noting that the slurry will be taken off-site to some of the rented land to be used as vital fertiliser for the land. Environmental health also had no objection other than the commission be placed regarding an odour, manure and pest management plan. This plan has been sent to the Environmental Health and they have approved it and are satisfied with the plan. The proposed development complies with policy SF4 of Derbyshire Dales local plan, helping to sustain an existing agricultural enterprise. The applicant has a genuine need for the proposed building, which is in keeping with existing buildings on site and supporting policy S4F of the Derbyshire Dales local plan. The applicant has gone to every effort to minimise the visual impact of the proposed development. Farming is an integral aspect of the countryside and an employer and an economic generator. Farming is a year-round 24-hour job, 7 days per week. As part of farming, noises from livestock and machinery are expected, as well as odour. The applicant is aware of the impact this may have upon the local resident and has submitted the pest, odour and complaints management plan in order to try and mitigate this. The applicant goes to every effort to meet DEFRA welfare standards. The proposed building will further help the applicant to maintain and further improve the care, husbandry, health and welfare of the Stocky Farms. Thank you very much, and I hope you're all in agreement.
Thank you very much. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. For members' benefit, this application requires full planning permission as opposed to prior notification, because we're dealing with a building that will house livestock, and it also involves a slurry store within 400 metres of a protected property in permitted development legislation. What that means is basically a residential dwelling outside of the existing agricultural holding. So in recognition of that, a full planning application has been submitted. You'll see in the officer's report that we've given consideration to the impacts of the building, the visual impact on the local landscape and character appearance of the area. This building would be well related to existing buildings on site, and the applicant has explained the reasons why a further building is required in this particular case for welfare reasons. You'll note in the officer's report the reference to Environmental Health Officer's comments on the original application and concerns raised about potential for odour and pest from this particular development. The applicant has sought to actively address those concerns by presenting a management plan to the local planning authority. That has been considered by our environmental health officers, and they're satisfied that would provide an acceptable level of protection in this particular case. You'll note that there's a condition that requires that plan be implemented in accordance with the measures and the details set out to officers. So we're happy that there's acceptable or appropriate controls in place to prevent unacceptable amenity impacts. The proposal does involve a slurry store, and that will provide appropriate storage and disposal of slurry from the site to prevent any pollution into any receiving watercourse. It's been designed to be a particular scale and volume to accommodate the slurry from the building and its intended use. And it's if any contaminants or any pollution of the watercourse was to happen, which is very unlikely based on the building as designed, that's something that will be regulated and controlled by the Environment Agency and not the local planning authority. I understand residents' concerns about the highway implications. We have to accept, however, that there's an existing operation from the site on the site, an agricultural operation, that vehicles are already accessing the site. The highway authority have looked at the application, and they've said, based on existing use, there would be no further intensification to such an extent that there would be severe impacts on the highway network to justify refusal. So they've raised no objections to the application. But I do accept the previous speaker's comments that there are issues on occasions with vehicles accessing the site and manoeuvring on the highway. The applicant has addressed that to some degree by referring to an access that's been approved. Obviously, this development will be served by its own access and hard standing area, and there is some manoeuvring space within the site. We're happy that it wouldn't be unacceptable from a highway safety perspective. We don't have the backing of the local highway authority, hence why we're recommending approval of the application on an as submitted basis. Happy to take questions at this stage.
Right, before we move to questions, what I'll do is I'll propose the next. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to propose an extension after 8:30 of 15 minutes. Could I find a seconder? All those in favour, please show. Right. Councillor Purdy.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions, Chris. I mean, it sounds a silly question because I've read it, but the provision of the new barn will stop more traffic movement. But my question mainly relates to the fact that there's no comment at the side of the Environment Agency. The agent said they've got no objection. Which one do we read? Is it that no comment means no objection, or is it unusual or usual for our Environment Agency to not comment?
Yes, the Environment Agency's position on this is they refer us to their standing advice, so they've not commented specifically on the application.
Right. Okay, thank you. And provision of the barn means less movement? Potentially.
In terms of sustainability, so you've got all the animals or a greater majority of animals being looked after on the site, and that's where the applicant currently resides in temporary accommodation on site. But in terms of activity on the site itself, that could potentially increase, but it's being concentrated in one area as opposed to someone having to travel some distance to service that enterprise.
Thank you, Chair. Very similar question to Councillor Purdy's, really. On item 5, right at the finish, it says the parish council had no objections, yet the speaker said they had, the clerk to the council said they had objections, which is correct, Chris?
Yeah, that is an error in the report. We've addressed it in the late representation sheet. Just to clarify, the parish council do object for the reasons set out in the late representation sheet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Fitzherbert.
Sorry, Chris, did you just mention, or did I hear wrongly, that there was provision for slightly better access or a secondary access to address the things that the speaker said, or I got that wrong?
If you look at the plan that's on the screen, the extent of the application site shows a new access to serve, or access roadway, if you like, to serve the building. The applicant has referred also to permission for an access previously granted.
Excuse me, you are not to talk while we're in committee.
I think it's a fair point from the speaker that in terms of manoeuvring space, that is limited, and members will have noted that from the site visit yesterday. But in terms of the access to the building, there is provision for additional hard surfacing up to the building, as set out in the plan.
I sort of get that, but those of us who were on site yesterday did see it was fairly straightforward for us to, in our vehicles, to turn round. But anyway, thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, is it not the case that what I would call the centre of gravity of the farming operation is not at Longford at all, but it's some miles away, where the vast majority of the land holding and therefore the stock grazing takes place? Is that the case?
The majority of the land holding is elsewhere, as set out in the officer's report. The applicant owns this parcel of land, and this is where their main infrastructure, if you like, their buildings and the property where they live is on site. So for animal welfare reasons, they're within sight and sound of animals in need of care.
So the 12 acres is here, but the remaining 270 odd acres is miles away. I note what your answer to Councillor Purdy around the sustainability and the transport. But actually, is it not the case that given that the vast majority of the land holding is some miles away, that in fact there'll be, and that we're now proposing to move over twice as many stock from the centre of gravity to this storage area? Is it not the case that actually there will be a very significant increase, certainly in the number of stock being moved from the main farm holding to this wintering operation, given that given the numbers involved here, it'd be 2.5 times as many moved?
Yes, that would potentially be the case here. What you've got to think is, if those buildings were carved elsewhere, then the functional need to be on site to look after those animals would also need to take place elsewhere. The applicant lives on this site, owns the land, and has their majority of their infrastructure on the site at Longford.
I agree with that, Michael. I agree, but there's a very significant difference between the applicant moving from their home to service the stock to moving the stock. There's a very significant difference, do you agree, in the type of movement?
I agree with the point, yes.
Okay. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Chris, for answering the question about why there was a necessity for planning application in this case. I was going to ask a similar question to Councillor O'Brien about the type of movement. But there is another question: is whose welfare is benefits from this? I mean, the welfare, is it the welfare of the animals or the welfare of the owner of the animals, or is it the welfare of the people who live in the area? And I wonder about the noise from cattle at night. Has this been taken into consideration by the planning officers? I used to run in Buckinghamshire past a similar shed with cattle in it, and the noise was incredible, even late at night, from the cattle in the shed. So can I? And finally, are there cattle in the larger, the 270 odd acre portion of this, or is that all sheep and all the cattle here, or is it a mixture?
Yes, a lot of things to come back on there. In terms of the need for the building and whether it's animal welfare reasons or convenience for the applicant, etc., it is an issue of providing care for the animals, particularly during calving, that there'd be a need for a presence on site or within sight and sound of those animals that are calving at that time. The applicant lives on the site, so for animal welfare reasons, it's preferable for the animals to be within sight and sound of where they currently live. So it's animal welfare reasons predominantly, but also this is where the concentration of infrastructure is located. So existing buildings and infrastructure is at the site at Longford, not elsewhere. Impacts on amenity is a material planning consideration. We've obviously consulted our environmental health officers, and they've had regard to the scale of operation on site, and they're satisfied with the management plan that's been presented, that the level of noise and odour and other amenity considerations can be satisfactorily addressed. We have to listen to that expert advice, and as officers, we're satisfied that there wouldn't be an unacceptable level of impact on the residential amenity of the occupants of neighbouring properties with conditions. But it's a matter of judgment, and it's for something for members to consider.
Okay, Councillor Wakeman.
Yeah, you'll never get a quiet farm. And that's for the video of the tractor. There's a lot worse farms out there that you have to reverse up tracks. I see them daily. So because of that, Chair, I'd like to recommend.
Can I move it for approval?
Move it forward, yeah, please.
Yeah, we can take somebody can take or put a motion forward, even if we're in questions. So I've got 3 people left on my list. No, you're not down, unfortunately, Councillor Barefoot. Anyway, Councillor Rose.
Thank you. I think there's a little bit of a mistake here, but it might be me. 1.1 says that Apple Tree Farm is a relatively newly established livestock farm, and it says the agricultural unit extends to 280 acres, but that's in Hatton, which is a long way from Longford. And 12 or 13 acres isn't a lot of land. And what I would like to ask is, when were the existing buildings erected? I know there's a temporary home there, but surely the applicant will be applying for a permanent home.
Yes, so just to confirm that is correct. The majority of the farmland, if you like, but not necessarily part of the agricultural unit, where buildings and infrastructure is currently located, is in an area outside of the application site. The applicant has demonstrated a functional need to be on site based on the scale of the enterprise, and that functional need has been established already through the permission that's been granted for a temporary agricultural workers dwelling on the site. So officers have granted permission for a temporary residence. I think in terms of what's meant by relatively new livestock farm, if you look at the planning history, you can see that the first buildings that were erected on that site, the first livestock buildings were back in 2011. So the enterprise, if you like, has grown from that point, but it is relatively new in that sense.
Okay, Councillor Allison and then Councillor Buttle, and then we'll move into debate.
Thank you, Chair. I fully understand that, you know, operating a farm is a 24/7 operation. So, I understand that there's got to be activity, you know, when you're doing this kind of, when you have this kind of enterprise. The only thing I wondered is that, is it possible to condition when vehicles can move on and off the site without kind of impacting the business? And I presume that if we could limit that, we could possibly alleviate some of the concerns around, you know, the potential sort of movement of that vehicle. Because I watched that video and I thought that's taking a long time to get in and out of that access. I wouldn't like to see that being done when there wasn't enough light or there was only half light. So is it possible to put some kind of condition around that? Thank you.
In my opinion, it wouldn't pass the test for conditions, in that the existing business can operate without restriction. And furthermore, the enterprise, there may be occasions where emergency visits to site with equipment and machinery may be necessary. So it could affect the operation, the successful operation.
I sort of understand that, but you could condition it so that you could allow emergency vehicles on there, but any planned vehicle movement or planned, I mean, surely you plan when you're moving livestock. It's not something you can just do at the drop of a hat. So could there be some restriction around movement of livestock then? Thank you.
Yeah, I think reflecting on the existing access arrangements and use of the site, we can't retrospectively restrict vehicle movements to the site, in my opinion.
Okay, Councillor Butler, then we'll move into debate.
Thank you. I was actually going to move against this one because I've got lots of concerns. We've got the phosphate neutral Natural England thing coming up now, where the runoff from livestock farms is changing the abilities of local sewage works to deal with what have you. Do we actually know how much slurry will be created, how much slurry will be spread on the few acres that are there, and how much needs to be moved 5 or so miles onto the land which they already have an agricultural holding?
Yeah, it's been specifically designed to accommodate the slurry storage that would be generated from the use of the building, and it's to prevent basically pollution of the nearby watercourses. But it's something that's regulated by the Environment Agency as opposed to the local planning authority, but it has been specifically designed to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. What I'm really wanting to say is, do we actually know whether or not we're going to having these cattle here rather than on the main holding of land, whether or not we're increasing the amount of movement of slurry and animals, trucks and all that across from one area to the other? And will there be an increased risk that the applicant is likely to put to the absolute maximum amount of slurry onto his holding here because it saves him having to shift it somewhere else?
What members need to consider is that the enterprise, animals already graze on the applicant's wider holding. This is for the housing of cattle in particular circumstances. whether they're housed here or elsewhere, there'll still be a requirement for animal welfare reasons to house them within a building. So in terms of the needs of the enterprise, I think they need those needs to be considered.
Yeah, obviously, but this is the wrong place for that building. This building should be where his land is, because that's where we should be. He should be disposing of the waste. He shouldn't be trying to truck it in and out because it's more convenient for him to stick a house here at some point in the future. That's my suspicion, and so I think we should be considering refusing this. I've got problem. I think everything that all the complaints that have been made. We're in questions, right? I'll come back to.
Okay, right. I'm going to move into debate. Councillor Wakeman's moved. Does somebody want to second that? Councillor Purdy. Do you want to?
Speak, Chair. Fully appreciate the concerns of the residents, but you know we can't just refuse this application without good reason, and I can find no good reason for refusal. So what we have here is a need for harmony, and the Environment Agency and our environmental health officers will police it to ensure that the operation is carried out as should be. So I can't see any good reason for refusal. I think we're getting into semantics in areas that are not in the control or possibility of this planning application. It's for the Environment Agency and the Environmental Health Department. And we've had the good advice from our officers, so I'm happy to second it, Chair.
Councillor Burfoot.
No, you wouldn't let me ask a question, so I'll do it a different way.
That's all right. That's why I did it.
Yeah, I've got concerns about this one. I mean, apart from anything else, the parish councils seem to be questioning whether the building's big enough, as recommended by DEFRA. So I'm wondering why we've not asked DEFRA for some comment. That's surely something we could do. But in terms of concerns, and I realise this is, you know, I'd be trying to think of material planning reasons, but I think there are concerns about the removal of this slurry, noise, smells, highway issues. I'm quite surprised at the what the highway authority have said. I mean, as I've said many times before on planning applications, once these things have happened, our environmental health people cannot be there all the time. And I think the concerns are around the noise and the smells and the removal of the slurry and all that sort of thing are sufficient to have a recommendation. Well, I'm not going to support this application. I think Councillor O'Brien is quite right in what he said. So I shan't be supporting it.
Okay, Councillor O'Brien, and I've got Councillor Fitzherbert and Councillor Slack, and then we'll go to the vote. Did you really? Well, in which case, then I'll put you down as long as you're quick, because I'd like to finish at a reasonable time today. No, Councillor O'Brien's next. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. First thing I say is Chris's response to Councillor Addison. I think I'd urge him to reconsider that, because as well as an application for the erection of an agricultural building, this is, to my mind, an intensification of use of the site. In fact, it's as much an intensification as it is a new building, and as such, if it's considered an intensification, and notwithstanding the fact that there are already two buildings with no movement restrictions, the fact that it's an intensification is a justification for imposing restrictions on when vehicle movement should take place if the application were approved. But having said that, I do think that we should listen very carefully and take account of what the parish council said, and I think they're quite right here. I don't think we should lightly dismiss their reasoning. The centre of this enterprise is not at this site. We have 12 acres here. You do not service 250 head of cattle on 12 acres. So clearly there is a movement of the centre of operation of this farm from where it is now to a 12-acre site. It's not for me to second guess the reasons for that, but I think the parish council are quite right that we should be looking in the opposite direction, as it were. We should be suggesting to the applicant that this is not an appropriate location for this intensification, but that the overwintering should take place where the majority of the land holding is taking place. That is entirely sensible and justifiable course of action. And again, the parish council is quite right. That complies with our policies. That is what our policies says. And yes, again, if we look at our sustainability agenda, then what we will be doing by agreeing with this application will be very significantly increasing the number of vehicle movements. Never mind the potential hazards and disturbance that they cause. There'd be a very, very significant increase in vehicle movements. So I think it's entirely reasonable for us to say, no, this is not an appropriate location. It's not an application we could approve. You should be focusing the operation on your main land holding. So for that reason, I don't feel I can support the recommendation.
Okay, what I need now is another extension of 15 minutes from 7:45. So I'll move it. Second. All those in favour? Okay, the next on my list is Councillor Fitzherbert, and I've got Councillor Slack and Councillor Hughes before we go to the vote.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll try and be brief. We can't really tell farmers how to farm. I've learned that the hard way. But we can defer to the authorities, DEFRA, Environment Agency, etc., as to how they maintain their land, maintain their livestock, vis-à-vis welfare, etc., and maintain the other phosphates that Councillor Buttle was saying. And the control of those aspects of this application are within their hands rather than ours. I understand why, I assume the reason why the applicant hasn't applied for from what I can gather, sheds on his other land is because it's tenanted, I think. And so this is on his own land, which he can execute the building of such shed if it is granted on his own land. Doesn't have to get any other permissions or do any other deals or long-term farm tenancies, etc. And I agree with Councillor Purdy that there's no valid planning reasons to turn this down, and I quite understand, and I hear exactly what the parish council and the neighbours have so eloquently put to this committee earlier on. The only thing I would add to this is the possible conditions. I sort of mentioned in my question earlier that there was some sort of a better access in and out, both north and south, that presented the highway obstructions that was highlighted in that one particular video, but you could see on site with larger wagons, etc., were going to be difficult. I don't know if we can condition that for officers to go away and talk. I don't know the lie of the land. I can't remember it from sight, but you would have thought that something could be to mitigate the entrance and the exit. Thank you.
I think we can put that as a footnote on the decision notice. Okay. So Councillor Slack, then Councillor Hughes, and then we're going to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very difficult one, this is really, because on one hand we've got the animal welfare, and the other is the distance, the distance from Hatton to Longford. I believe Hatton's not in the Derbyshire Dales, is it? I'm not sure. Is it in South Derbyshire? I'm not sure. Anyway, it's going from one area to another. I do agree with Richard that they got the buildings there at Longford, which they can carve in. They haven't got the facilities at Hatton to do that. And if it's a tenanted land, as Richard's put forward, it's difficult to get buildings on that site. So for the welfare of the animals, it's better to take them to Longford to be carved, really. And I'm like that, in between. I see some views and other views, but welfare animals is number one, really. You can't have a farm and not look after the animals. So the best way is to carve them in a building, really. So it's obvious, really. You've got to take them to Longford to carve them. So I'm undecided yet. I'll see how it develops, but that's how I feel. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and last but not least is Councillor Hughes before the vote.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have. I came to the meeting thinking I would vote for this, and I've heard the representations from the parish council and others, and they cause me great concern. And the issue about whether there are several issues about welfare and amenity. I'm not sure about the number of journeys that will be made in either direction, but I know that a farmer can make a journey if he's going to visit a site and isn't having to transport anything. He can go in a car or a Land Rover or van or something like that. Whereas if you're moving slurry, it's likely to be in a trailer towed by a tractor. And if you're moving livestock, similarly, it'll be a trailer probably towed by a tractor, which will be a far more onerous journey than a farmer making a journey in a Land Rover. So my feeling is that the journeys from this, from the additional journeys from this site will be mainly difficult ones, with tractors pulling trailers, not easy ones done in cars, which could be, and a lot of people have to commute 5 miles to their place of work. So I can't see that that is particularly onerous. I worry about the welfare of the neighbours because the shed, there will be noise all night, there will be smells, and I worry for the environment. And we might say that this is something for the Environment Agency and others, but in fact, it's for the people who live in the local area, and the rivers running through the site. The danger of a spill is quite high, and if that happens, then that river and the ones downstream will be damaged. So I think we need to take into consideration the environmental damage that may be caused by runoff from the fields and from potential accidents. So I'm like Peter, I'm worried about this development. As I said, I came in thinking I would vote for it. I'm not so sure now.
Okay, so you've got to get a go at that now. So it's been moved and seconded for approval. All those in favour, please show. And all those against? Any abstention? It's been approved. I think. Yeah, it's been approved. Okay, thank you very much. And the last on my list is item 6, which is just for noting. So I'll move it for noting. Second. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much, and thank you very much. I'll now close the meeting.